Hello and welcome back to another episode of From Prison to the Streets. I'm Eric. I did 11 years in prison and I talk about prison stuff. Today we're doing a video that is a long time coming. I said I was going to do it a long time ago and I never did. We're talking about martial arts in prison. Are they effective? Are they not? And if so, why are they effective? And as a spoiler, yeah, martial arts are effective in prison if you legitimately know martial arts. And there's certain martial arts that are a little bit better than others. I'm going to tell you about my background a little bit. And I'm going to tell you about some posers in prison because there's a lot of people who claim to know martial arts in prison. And usually those people are scared. I'm going to tell you about that a little bit. I'm going to tell you about the unique challenges that come with fighting in a prison environment. You know, a prison context is different than rolling on a mat or fighting in a boxing ring. It's different. There are unique challenges that come with fighting in a prison environment. And I'm going to share with you what I think is the most important factor in any fight, any real world fight. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And then I'm going to talk to you about what fighting styles I feel work well in a prison environment and why. I'm going to talk to you about the pros and cons of each one of them. So with that, TJ Spartacus, you're going to like this one, man. But with that, let's get into the video. So first, let me tell you a little bit about my background. I'm a martial artist. I'm not a badass. I want to get that out of the way right now. You know, I'm not this, master of some style where I can just make a guy look like a fool when he gets in a fight with me. I'm not that. I have been in several fights. I've lost several fights. I've been knocked out. I just want to get that out of the way because a lot of guys who go to prison and talk about being a martial artist, they suck and they're just lying and they don't have any real experience. That's not saying all of them are like that, but quite a few of them are. But my background is in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and boxing primarily, and I have some experience with Taekwondo as well. But those are the things that I've practiced, and those are the things that I have experience with. Now, I also have quite a bit of experience getting into real fights, real street fights. But I don't want to talk endlessly about my own background and make this video about me. I want to give you guys some cool information. That's what I'm here for. So let's talk about the rest of it. Let's talk about posers. In prison, you will hear a lot of guys claim to know martial arts of some sort or another, and a lot of guys are lying. I mean, for a lack of a better way to say it, they're scared and they don't want people to mess with them, so they will go around saying, yeah, I know this or I know that. I know Jeet Kune Do or I know Kung Fu or I know Karate or I know Taekwondo. I know jiu-jitsu. You'll hear this from guys that are in prison that really don't have that experience. Or maybe they did some drills or something and did some forms or katas, but they don't have a lot of experience with live training or a real world scenario. And I have a hard time taking those guys seriously sometimes because they, they're just scared. They don't want to fight. And they don't want people to try them out, so they act like they're some sort of tough guy. There are a few people in prison that know martial arts. There was a guy who legitimately knew karate, and he was gay, and he would teach other people karate. And he had this group of guys that would train karate with him in prison. And they ended up forming their own gang. And it was really funny because, they were all gay. And that's not the funny part. But they called themselves the Pink Ninjas. That was the funny part. And there's nothing funnier to me than getting beat up by a guy who calls himself a Pink Ninja. I don't know why, but I find that extremely amusing. And some of them could actually fight and mess some people up. But all that's beside the point. I just thought that was amusing a little bit. If you want me to tell you about the Pink Ninjas sometime, I will. But back to the discussion at hand, you have a lot of posers. You have a few guys that aren't posers, for sure, but you have a lot of posers. Let's talk about the unique challenges that you're going to face when it comes to martial arts in a prison context, in a prison environment. See, most martial arts will have a very controlled setting in which they take place. You know, you'll have jiu-jitsu guys that roll on a mat. You'll have boxers that fight in a ring, or Muay Thai guys that fight in a ring, or MMA guys that fight in a cage. It's a controlled setting. Usually you have rules and stuff like that. And prison's completely different from that. Most fights in prison will take place in one of two areas: in an open space or in a very enclosed space. And what I mean by that, if you get in a fight out on the yard, you are very much out in the open. Very much out in the open. And if you get in a fight in your cell, you're literally fighting in an area that might be 6 foot by 8 foot or 12 foot by 8 foot, depending on what prison you're in. Being in an enclosed area like that has its own challenges, and being in an open area has its own challenges. And when I say open area, I don't just mean the yard. It could be the day room. It could be something like that. But you have a lot of room. And then you have the cell where you have no room. If you're in the cell, the challenges that you face are all your movements are very linear. You know, your kicks, you don't have enough room to do some sweeping kicks where you have a lot of rotation and stuff. It's not going to work that great. You need to be very, very linear. Something like a side kick might work okay, or a front kick if you want to create some distance between you and the guy you're fighting. A front kick is very useful, and that will work in a cell. But all these big movements and stuff, you don't have the space for that in the cell. The other thing that you have to worry about in the cell, everything in that cell is solid. You know, your bunks are made out of steel. Your desk is made out of steel. Your toilet is made out of steel. Your walls are made out of concrete. Your floor is made out of concrete. Anything you bounce off of in that cell is going to hurt you. It is not like a ring. It is not like a cage. If you touch those walls, you're going to get hurt. And you will get hurt, for real. If you're fighting in the cell, you're probably going to get hurt. The other challenge that I want to talk about when it comes to fighting in the cell, you know, that fight's going to go on for a minute. If the cop just did rounds and you and your cellie start fighting, or you invite someone into the cell to fight, no one's going to break that fight up for a while. No one's going to see it. The cops, they're gone, right? No one's going to see that. No one's going to break it up. So you don't have these rounds like you have in traditional martial arts or MMA or boxing or whatever. You don't have rounds. You're going until one of you can't, essentially. Or maybe you can neutralize the threat and keep dude pinned down until the cops do come around and do their rounds, whatever. But that's not usually how it goes. You're stuck in there, and it's basically gonna keep going until one of you can't go anymore. And another challenge that comes with being in an enclosed space is your footwork. You know, if you're a boxer or an MMA guy or a kickboxer or something like that, you're used to being able to use your footwork to your advantage. You know, you can get your angles and stuff like that. You can move around your opponent. You can engage and disengage, move in and out, you know, cut around to the side, whatever. You can't do that in a cell. It just doesn't work. Everything is very linear. And usually you end up clinched up or you end up on the ground. That happens a lot. So those are the unique challenges that come with fighting in the cell. What about outside the cell? If you're fighting in the day room, if you're fighting in the yard, any open area, the first challenge is that fight's going to be over in probably under a minute. There are cameras everywhere. There are cops everywhere. They see you fighting. People see you fighting. They make noise about it. And that fight's going to be over very quickly. The goon squad's going to come running. The black suits are going to come running. They're going to come break that up. You're going to get slammed on the ground. So if you really want to just last until, you know, the cops come break it up, if you don't really want to fight, you can do that. You can, you know, create some distance between you and whoever. Some guys who are bad at fighting or they're afraid of fighting, but they have a situation where they need to fight to save face, they will actually start a fight right in front of the cops, so it'll get broke up very, very quickly. You know, they know they can't fight. They know they're going to lose, but they're going to lose some of their reputation if they don't do something about whatever's going on. So they'll wait till the guy is over by the cops, and then they'll rush in and start dinging them up, right? That's something that happens. But on the other side of that, if you are in a fight out in the open and you know it's going to be broken up quickly and you want to do damage for whatever reason, maybe this guy is a serious threat to you and you just want to put an end to this matter before it escalates, and you need to do so in a decisive manner, you're going to have to find a way to end that fight in 30 seconds to a minute, because it's going to be over fast. That is the main challenge with fighting in an open area in prison. I'm not going to talk too much about a lot of the other challenges because they're not really that big of a deal when it comes to an open area. But there is a common thread that I want to talk about that is applicable to fighting in the cell or in an open space. There are a couple of things in prison that are unique that you have to bear in mind. The first thing you need to bear in mind is that there aren't any rules. And a fight in prison can very easily be a life or death situation. You might be dealing with someone who's trying to kill you. So you need to fight for your life. You need to act like there's something important on the line. This isn't a thing where we're fighting for points. This isn't a thing where we're going to be judged at the end of a 5-minute round. This is not a thing where we're worried about sportsmanship or anything like that. We're in a situation where the other guy is trying to do us damage, serious damage, and perhaps end our life. Anything that's not bolted down is a weapon, and it can and probably should be used in that situation because you want to give yourself a good advantage. That's how I fight anyway. If I get into a fight in prison, anything goes. I don't care if I got to bite you. I don't care if I have to hit you in the head with something. I don't care because I don't want you to kill me. That's how I fight in prison. I assume the other person is trying to end my life, and I'm going to fight accordingly. The next thing that is applicable to both an enclosed space and an open space is the ground is very unforgiving. I talked about how everything in the cell is hard. Just about everything in prison in general is hard. You know, they're made out of concrete, and the tables are made out of steel. Everything is solid. So if you get slammed in prison, you might get hurt pretty bad. If your head bounces off that concrete, you're going to be hurt. So that's something to be aware of. That's not the same as taking a fall on a mat. The final thing that you have to worry about, whether you're in a small area or an open space, is fighting multiple attackers. There are a lot of gang politics in prison, and you can easily find yourself in a situation where you are being attacked by more than one person. This is a difficult one because not many martial arts train with the intent to fend off or fight off multiple attackers. That's a tough one. Very few martial arts can do that effectively. Matter of fact, most people with experience with martial arts or self-defense will tell you if you're facing multiple people, the best thing you can do is run. But in prison, if you run, you're seen as weak, and you can't do that. You have to fight. Even if you know you're going to lose, you have to fight. So that is a very difficult challenge that any martial artist is going to face in a prison environment. If you're fighting multiple attackers, you have to figure out how to deal with that. So I've talked about the unique challenges that come with a prison environment. And now I want to talk to you about what I think is the most important factor in any fight. I don't care if you're fighting in a cage, a ring, if you're on the mat, if you're in the real world, or if you're in prison. I don't care. There is something that is extremely important in any fight, and it is experience. There is a big debate going on online. I've seen it on TikTok and YouTube and a few other things about size. You know, does size matter in a fight? And in truth, it does matter. But I don't think that is the end of the discussion. I don't think it decides a fight, because I've seen small guys that have whooped big guys, and I've seen big guys that have whooped small guys, and I've seen big guys that have whooped other big guys. But it seems to me that the deciding factor maybe, or the most important thing, I should say, in a fight is experience. Have you been hit in the face? Do you know how to deal with that? Do you know how to avoid it? Do you have experience with someone who is legitimately trying to cause you bodily harm? That's important. If you've been in a few scrapes here and there, it helps you out a lot. If you've been in a lot of fights, it helps you a lot. It's really important to be able to keep your cool and think clearly and be level-headed when you get your shit rocked. A lot of people get their shit rocked and they start to panic. Oh, man. You know, sometimes everything will go black for a split second, and then you're confused, and when you come to, you're bouncing off of stuff. That sucks. But can you maintain a level head when that's going on and start to strategize? Can you think clearly about what you need to do to get out of a bad situation? That, in my opinion, is what makes a very good fighter. Not necessarily size or the style that they practice. It's their ability to think in a very chaotic situation and make sense of things. And when you have experience, a lot of times things are going to become automatic and you won't have to think so much about little things, and you can actually devote a little bit more attention to formulating a strategy or figuring out what you need to do to get out of that situation. So, in my opinion, the most important factor in a fight is experience. You're more than welcome to disagree with that. That's fine. Everybody is free to have an opinion, and there might be some truth to people who disagree with me. But this is just how I feel about that. Now I want to talk about what fighting styles work well, in my opinion, and why. Now, some of these are theoretical. Two of them in particular are theoretical because I've never seen them used in a prison environment. I will say that I feel like they would work very well in a prison environment, but we're going to get to that in just a minute. First, let me tell you what styles I think would work well. I think boxing, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, wrestling, Muay Thai, Eskrima or Kali, and MMA are the best martial arts styles for fighting in a prison environment. Before I explain to you why, let me say that Muay Thai and Eskrima and Kali, that's kind of on the theoretical side because I haven't seen that actually used in a prison environment, but I think they would work well. But that said, let's start examining the pros and cons. What do these martial arts styles do well in a prison environment, and what do they not do so well at? Let's start with boxing. What I think boxing does well, first off, is that it has the potential to end a fight immediately. I've been knocked out before. If someone catches you with a clean punch, you can be out, and that fight is over. If you knock someone out, they're done. Especially in a prison environment where if you're in an open space, the cops are going to be there in 30 seconds to a minute, and they're going to break it up. You can end that fight in 30 seconds to a minute. You can do that. In a cell, if you knock someone out for a split second, a lot can happen in the few seconds that they're unconscious. And you can end that fight immediately. Boxers are very good at knowing how to punch and get a lot of power on their punches, and they're very good at placing their punches. You know, a boxer knows that they can catch you on the chin or just underneath the ear and do some damage, but a boxer also knows that they can get you with a liver shot and knock you out by punching you in the stomach, essentially. Just on the right-hand side of the body, you land a clean punch there with decent power and you can put someone down. A boxer knows that. The next thing a boxer is really good at, especially in an open area like on the yard or something, a boxer can frustrate their opponent, especially someone who's untrained, and most people in prison are untrained. A boxer can frustrate them by slipping punches, bobbing and weaving. If you can't hit someone, that is extremely frustrating. The other thing that a boxer really has going for them is they have experience getting punched. A lot of the styles that I'm going to talk about in this video include a lot of live training. Boxers get into a ring, they spar. They are not unaccustomed to getting punched in the face. And boxers have great conditioning. It takes quite a bit to go 12 rounds in boxing, or 10 rounds, or even, 5 or 6 rounds in boxing. It is a very physically demanding sport. Your cardio has to be on point, and that can help you in an enclosed space. Boxing also has an advantage of being somewhat usable against multiple opponents, because if you can land a flush punch, let's say you're fighting 2 guys, and right out the gate you knock one of them out, now you can deal with the other one without having to worry about the first guy. Boxing is good for that. So what are the cons of boxing? Not boxing cons, but what are the cons of boxing? Because we all know that cons get in their feelings sometimes and they'll box, but what are the cons of boxing? Well, your angles and footwork become severely limited when you're in an enclosed area, and boxing relies heavily on angles and footwork. That's very important in boxing. You need to be able to move around your opponent. You need to be able to engage and disengage in order to place your shots right, because you're thinking about the long term. You need to have some durability, and you need to be able to preserve yourself to go the distance, right? That's important in boxing. But in the cell, you might not be able to engage and disengage like that. You might not be able to use angles to your advantage. If you're out on the yard, that's a possibility, but in the cell, it's really, really hard to do. The other thing that boxing doesn't do well is stuff on the ground. A lot of fights are going to end up on the ground, and a guy who just trains boxing might not know what to do there. A lot of fights also end up in the clinch. Guys will end up hugging. That's what we call it in prison. Oh, what happened with so-and-so? Oh, nothing, man. That fight wasn't nothing. Those dudes just ended up grabbing a hold of each other and trying to choke each other. They were hugging. Boxing doesn't do well in that sort of situation. And I think another drawback to boxing is it has the greatest potential for personal injury. You can punch someone and break your hand. You can throw a punch, miss the punch, and hit a concrete wall or hit the ground or something like that, and you can end up doing damage to yourself, whereas the goal is to end the fight, to stop your opponent, to injure them. And that's where boxing kind of has an issue there if you hurt yourself. Okay, so let's talk about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, BJJ. Jiu-Jitsu does some things very, very well, and Jiu-Jitsu guys are very good at closing the distance. In the Gracie Combatives, we do a lot of stuff where we're trying to train for someone who is potentially trying to punch us. It's a street fight thing. It's a self-defense scenario in the Gracie Combatives. So you're not training to go against someone who actually does jiu-jitsu. You're going against an untrained person who's just trying to fight you. The reason why that's important is when you close the distance, you take away a person's punching power. If you're punching someone, you really want to catch them on the end of your punches because that's where most of your power is. But if someone gets in close and they grab a hold of you in such a way that you can't really hit them or at least get any power on your punches, that kind of neutralizes that threat. Your punches aren't really doing anything. Jiu-jitsu guys also do a lot of live training. They will roll on the mat with each other and try to submit each other. And they're not strangers to physical combat. And that's important. It's one thing to do drills all the time. That's great for building up your muscle memory and stuff like that and making stuff become automatic. That's also important. But you also need to keep a cool, calm, level-headed mentality when you're going into a fight. And jiu-jitsu guys are very good at that. Jiu-jitsu is also very good at neutralizing threats without causing damage or injury to the other person. I might roll with someone who's trying to hurt me, and I can neutralize them. I can tie them up to where they can't really move. They're in a position where they can't get out of whatever hold I have them in, but I'm not hurting them. And I can just hold them there until someone breaks up the fight. Jiu-jitsu is really good for that, and you're not throwing a bunch of punches like boxing and, presenting the risk to yourself of breaking your own hands or breaking your own bones. So that's a distinct advantage of jiu-jitsu. It also confuses people. A lot of folks don't know what to do against a jiu-jitsu guy because, they'll think that they're winning the fight because they got the fight to the ground. But for real, a BJJ guy is going to let you take it to the ground if they are confident that they can handle that situation better than you. And most of the time, that's the case. Jiu-jitsu guys are very confident on the ground, and that can be confusing because you take a guy down and it's super easy, and then you feel confident, and the next thing you know, the dude's folding your clothes with you still in those clothes, and you're a pretzel and you can't move, or you're in a lot of pain, and you don't know what's going on. You think you're trying to get him in a headlock, or he'll give you a position without you knowing that he's giving you the position, just waiting for you to mess up so he can, fold your arm or leg a certain way. Jiu-jitsu is confusing. If you go with a high-level jiu-jitsu guy, if you're rolling with him, he knows what you're going to do before you know what you're going to do. That's the reality of it. The other cool thing about jiu-jitsu, I guess, it can be cool, it can be pretty brutal. Jiu-jitsu can end a fight in a very, very decisive manner. While jiu-jitsu can neutralize a fight, if you're just wanting to hold someone until someone comes and breaks up the fight, jiu-jitsu can do that. But you can also put someone in an arm bar and break their arm. You can put someone in a knee bar and break their leg. A kimura will tear their shoulder to shreds. You can choke them out. Jiu-jitsu can make a statement. If you break someone's arm and that hits the yard, people know about it, people are going to talk, and you're going to have some reputation for that. Jiu-jitsu is also very good when it comes to strength and conditioning. You're basically trying to move someone else's body weight around for X amount of time while you're rolling, and you have to control your breathing quite a bit. It's one of those things where we try not to get gassed out. We want to last as long as possible in a fight because that's going to give us a distinct advantage if the other guy gasses out before us. I've had people tap out just because they got tired before. So what are the cons to jiu-jitsu? Well, the biggest one, I think, is probably time. In my opinion, jiu-jitsu is very much a long game. I like to wait for positions. I like to, think about it like a chess match. It's not necessarily something that happens immediately. It's very much a thinking man's game, and prison doesn't always allow for that. If you have to end a fight in 30 seconds to a minute, that's tough to do in jiu-jitsu. The other thing is, it's very challenging if you're trying to fight in an enclosed space. I talked about how small the cells were, and generally when you're practicing jiu-jitsu, you have a nice size mat. You're not really limited on space that much. Even if you're in a competition and you have a out of bounds area, you have a lot more space than you do in a prison cell. So you might not have the room to move around how you want and get the positions that you want. There's not even room in a cell to really put someone inside control effectively. That is a major downside of jiu-jitsu in a prison context. Jiu-jitsu is also very, very ineffective against multiple attackers. There aren't many things in jiu-jitsu where you can submit multiple people at the same time. I've never seen something like that, or tie multiple people up at the same time. I've never seen anything like that. What the reality of it is, you'll get a dude in a headlock or a choke of some sort, a rear naked choke. That's my favorite. And you'll have him, and that's all good. Meanwhile, while you're trying to grapple with one dude, another guy is going to be punching you in the face or kicking you or whatever. And jiu-jitsu isn't very good at addressing that scenario. The next style I want to talk about, and I don't know if I mentioned this in the beginning of the video. I meant to. If I didn't, it was an oversight. But I want to talk about wrestling. Wrestling has a lot of great practical applications in a prison fight, so we're going to talk about it. Wrestlers are very, very good at overwhelming their opponents. If someone wrestled at a state level when they were in high school, or if they wrestled at a college level, they can put you on your ass before you know what's going on, and that can be overwhelming. Wrestling is very good at that. It's very good for controlling your opponent. I think it does that very well, and it can end a fight very quickly. If you slam someone and they smack their head on the concrete, that's it. That fight's probably over. And if you slam them hard enough and you damage their ribs or something like that, that fight's over. So wrestling can very decisively and very quickly end a fight, and that's good whether it's an enclosed space or out on the yard. And wrestlers have really good conditioning, and they do a lot of live training. You see a common thread here. Live training is very important, in my opinion. The cons with wrestling is that wrestlers aren't really accustomed to getting punched in most cases. Now, if it's a wrestler who has also had a lot of bar fights or brawls or something like that, by all means, I'm not taking that away from the guy, because there are a lot of people like that, whether it's jiu-jitsu, boxing, whatever. There are a lot of people who have gotten into fights that were not sanctioned, that were not in a controlled setting, but we're not talking about that right now. Strictly wrestling, a wrestler will not be super accustomed to getting punched in the face. Sometimes time can be an issue. Wrestlers won't always be able to get that takedown or slam someone immediately out the gate. And in wrestling, enclosed spaces can present a challenge, not all the time, so that one's kind of a gray area. One of the bigger downsides to wrestling, in my opinion, is the risk of serious injury to your opponent. If you slam a guy on concrete and his head bounces off that concrete, you could kill him, and then you're looking at new charges. And we're not trying to do that, right? So that's a downside. Next, I want to talk about one that's a little bit more theoretical because I haven't seen a lot of it in prison. I want to talk about Muay Thai. And Muay Thai is great when it comes to opening up an opponent. If you've been in a real fight, you probably know that when you make a guy bleed, a lot of things happen. He can be overwhelmed by that. He can be shocked by that. But more importantly, the blood will get in his eyes and affect his ability to defend himself. And depending on where you hit him, and this is true for boxing too, if you hit someone in the nose hard enough and they're bleeding really bad and that's going down the back of their throat or something like that, that can affect their ability to defend themselves. And if, for real, if you hit someone in the nose hard enough and their eyes tear up and all that stuff, you're going to impair their ability to defend themselves anyway, but that's beside the point. Muay Thai is very good at opening people up. And the reason why Muay Thai is good at opening people up is because there's a lot of elbows. And the elbow is a very, very small piece of bone that sticks out. You know, that has a very small surface area, which means more pressure, and that can cut people. And knees can do a lot of damage as well. You can get someone in the liver with a knee or in the solar plexus, and you can end a fight. Muay Thai can end a fight almost immediately. Hi guys, this is Eric from the future. I was editing this video. I know it's a long video. I'm sorry. But I realized that I forgot to include a couple of things about Muay Thai and wrestling, and that is clinch fighting. Muay Thai is very good with the clinch, and so is wrestling. And what the clinch does is it allows you to close the distance, much like jiu-jitsu, neutralizing a lot of strikes, a lot of punching power, and a lot of kicks. Furthermore, the clinch is very effective in an enclosed space such as a prison cell. So I just thought I would throw that in there, and, you know, it's already a long video, so why not? Thank you if you've made it this far. I know most of you won't, but I hope you're still watching, and yeah, back to the video. Like boxing, Muay Thai can be effective against multiple opponents. And guys who train Muay Thai, they also do a lot of live training, so that is a good thing, right? The cons are basically the same as boxing. I'm not going to reiterate all of those, but the added con that I would say comes with Muay Thai is a increased risk of seriously injuring your opponent. You know, there's a video floating around the internet right now of a guy kneeing a dude in the face and caving his skull in, which is a bad thing, you know. Muay Thai is effective in enclosed spaces, it's effective out on the yard, and it's dangerous. You can open a guy up. I think it's a very effective style for a prison environment. The next thing I want to talk about is Kali or Eskrima. Kali practitioners understand that anything can be a weapon, just about. And they have an understanding of how to use edged and blunt weapons, which is important in a prison environment where, you know, you might be facing someone in a knife fight. Kali practitioners are also trained to disarm opponents, which is helpful and they have a realistic understanding of what a knife fight really is. You know, nobody wins a knife fight, and I think Kali practitioners get that. If you're facing someone who has a knife, you're going to get hurt. There's no getting around that. You're going to get cut, and it's going to hurt, and you're going to bleed, and it could be realistically a very lethal situation. What I don't like about Kali is that it is lethal. You know, Kali guys, they practice to stab people, slash people, and if a trained fighter has a knife, you're in trouble. And if you are a Kali practitioner and you kill someone, you could be looking at new charges. The other thing I don't like about Kali is a lack of live training. You know, if you're training with knives and stuff, you can't really train that much with a real weapon because you're going to be hurting your sparring partner pretty bad. Now, some people do some live-ish drills, but I wouldn't call it true live training, and that's one of the downsides. I also don't like how some Kali schools are very reliant upon forms. Forms have their uses, but, you know, in a real fight, nothing is really cut and dry. Anything can happen. And so what happens if you know how to do this form in this situation or this form in that situation, and then neither of those two situations happen? Are you still going to know how to handle yourself? They'll probably be fine because they're trained to use a knife. You know what I mean? But that's something that I don't really like, and not all Kali schools are like that. I also don't like how the open-handed techniques are a little bit less effective than boxing. When it comes to striking, I'm not going to use a lot of Kali stuff. I would probably use boxing because boxers have really good power. And, you know, it is what it is. But I don't think that Kali strikes are quite as effective as a boxer's strikes. Now I'm going to talk about the one that's my favorite, which is MMA. I think MMA is probably the best martial art for a prison setting, and MMA is not one martial art, it's several. You know, you can take the things that boxing does well, jiu-jitsu does well, wrestling, and you can kind of weed out some of the cons of those styles and develop something that's a little bit more well-rounded. I think that's where MMA really, really excels. And MMA fighters or people who train MMA are used to adapting to a certain person or a certain opponent. And that's a good thing because in prison, you have to learn how to adapt very quickly, just like an MMA fight. You know, this isn't working, so what do I do next? And they can seamlessly blend styles or switch between this style and that style. Okay, wrestling isn't working, let me do some stuff on my feet, let me throw some strikes, or these strikes aren't working, let's get them to the ground and then implement some jiu-jitsu. I think that's where MMA really, really excels. MMA also does really well in that people who train MMA usually have a decent amount of experience, which I said earlier is the most important factor, in my opinion, in any fight. MMA people are usually training to make a career out of fighting. You know, they punch people in the face because they're passionate about it. And that's a completely different animal. A lot of people don't like to fight, and an MMA person is not that person. They are okay with being punched in the face, and they have experience being punched in the face, and that's a little bit scary. MMA guys also have really good conditioning, so that's, you know, goes back to what I said about boxing and jiu-jitsu. That's a really cool thing. The only weak points I see with MMA is sometimes MMA guys are bound by a lot of rules, and what do you do when you take all those rules away? Are you going to be able to capitalize on a situation where you have a weapon within arm's reach and you can end a fight immediately? Are you going to forego that and allow them the opportunity to grab that weapon? That's kind of questionable, and I don't know if every MMA person would do that. I can't really say that, but that's one of the problems that I see. And I think MMA people might also have a little bit of a skewed view on what a fight really is. It's not about, you know, going this many rounds and winning a fight and getting on to the next fight. A real fight is about preserving your life. You're fighting for your life, and anything can happen. You can die, the other person can die, and MMA fighters might not have that perception of a fight, and I think that perception of a fight is pretty important when it comes to a prison setting, because that is the reality of it. That's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope you found it informative. My battery is about to die on my camera, but I pretty much said everything I wanted to say. And this has been another episode of From Prison to the Streets. I hope y'all are doing well. I love y'all. TJ Spartacus, I hope you enjoyed the video. I'm Eric. I will see you all later. They can't hold what can be.